The biting November wind whips Alara's thin shawl tighter around her, a meager defense against the chill that seems to emanate from the very dust of Havenwood's main street. It's a chill that has settled deep in her bones these past months, a companion to the grief that still clings to her like the scent of wood smoke on a winter morning. Her hand, hidden in the folds of the shawl, clutches the small, hard object that is her last link to warmth, to love, to a life that feels a lifetime away. Inside Thompson's mercantile, the air is thick with the smells of kerosene, dried goods, and desperation. Mr. Thompson himself, a man whose spectacles always seem perched precariously on his nose, looks up as she enters, his expression a practiced blend of business and weary sympathy. Alara doesn't meet his gaze directly. She can't. The shame is a fresh burn. She's here to sell a piece of her soul, and the town is watching, always watching. The school, Havenwood's only beacon of hope for its children, is failing. Its teacher, Miss Evans, is threatening to leave, the funds depleted. Alara, with a baby growing beneath her heart, a child who will need that school, has nothing left to give. Nothing but this. Mr. Thompson polishes his spectacles, a gesture she knows precedes a difficult transaction. Alara, are you sure? He trails off, the unspoken words hanging heavy between them. Your last connection to him. The children need the school, she insists, a flicker of her late husband's resolve in her eyes. More than I need. Memories. The lie tastes like ash. From the shadowed corner of the mercantile, near the sacks of flour and beans, a man observes. Josiah. He's new enough to Havenwood that most folks barely register him. Just another quiet cowboy passing through or settling on the outskirts. He sees the tremor in Alara's hand, the unshed tears in her eyes, the proud, painful set of her jaw. He hears the low price Mr. Thompson offers, a price dictated by necessity and the harsh realities of their world. He sees her nod, a jerky, final movement. He watches her walk out, her back straight, her dignity a fragile shield against the weight of her sacrifice. The bell above the door tinkles, a mournful sound. And in that moment, as the small gold band glares accusingly from the dusty countertop, Josiah knows what he must do. This act of quiet desperation, of profound love for a community's future, cannot be the final word. There's more to this quiet cowboy than meets the eye. Before his true worth or secret comes to light, tell us, have you ever misjudged someone only to be surprised? And if you love a story of hidden depths, hit like and subscribe. The weight of the transaction settles upon Alara the moment she stepped out of Thompson's mercantile, heavier than the child she carried. The few coins in her pocket, destined for Miss Evans and the dwindling school fund, felt like cold stones. Each jingle with her hesitant steps was a reminder of the gleaming gold band she'd left behind, a circle of love and memory now reduced to its mere monetary value. That ring had been John's promise, a tangible piece of their shared dreams, dreams that had included children who would laugh and learn within the walls of the Havenwood schoolhouse. Now John was gone, lost to the fever that had swept through the valley last spring, and the ring, her last solid piece of him, was gone too. All for a hope, a fragile, desperate hope that the school might survive another season. She walked the length of Havenwood's dusty main thoroughfare, past the shuttered windows of businesses that hadn't survived the last harsh winter, past the saloon already murmuring with early patrons, and towards the small, clapboard house at the edge of town that she still, with a pang, called home. It was John who had built it, his hands shaping the rough-hewn timber, his laughter echoing in the small rooms. Now it was just her, the silence, and the ever-present ache of his absence. Alara was acutely aware of her condition, the gentle swell of her belly a constant reminder of the new life intertwined with her grief. This child, John's child, deserved a future, deserved the chance to read, to write, to understand the world beyond the confines of Havenwood. That was why the ring had to be sold. It was a mother's sacrifice, echoing the one she made every day just by continuing, by facing the dawn alone. Josiah, who had watched her leave the mercantile, remained in the shadows for a long moment. He was not a man given to impulse, but the sight of Alara's quiet anguish had struck a chord deep within him. He was a relative newcomer to Havenwood, having purchased the old Miller place on the far side of Redemption Creek a few months back. The land was neglected, the cabin little more than a shell, but it offered solitude, a place where a man could work out his thoughts and perhaps build something new from the wreckage of an old life. Most townsfolk saw him as a drifter, perhaps, or a man with little to say and even less to share. He preferred it that way. His past was his own, a landscape of hard work, some successes, and a measure of quiet sorrow that had taught him the value of reticence. He wasn't poor, not by Havenwood standards, having come into a modest inheritance that he managed with care, but he lived simply, his needs few. He had seen Alara before, of course. A pregnant widow in a town this small was hard to miss. He'd noted her quiet dignity, the way she carried herself despite the visible weight of her loss and her impending motherhood. He'd heard snippets of her story. A good man taken too soon, a woman left to fend for herself. He'd also heard the worried talk about the school. Miss Abigail Evans, the young teacher who had arrived with such bright hopes 2 years prior, was on the verge of leaving. The school funds, reliant on sporadic community donations and meager county stipends, had dried up. Jedediah Blackwood, the town's most prosperous rancher and a man whose voice carried significant weight on the council, had publicly opined that perhaps Havenwood couldn't afford such luxuries as a dedicated schoolmarm anymore. His pronouncements had cast a pall over the town. Josiah approached the counter where Mr. Thompson was carefully placing Alara's ring into a small, velvet-lined box. "That ring," Josiah said, his voice low and steady. "The one the lady just sold. I'll buy it." Mr. Thompson looked up, surprised. "You, Mr. Rivers? Well now, it's a fine piece of gold, simple, but meaningful, I'd wager." He named a price slightly higher than what he'd given Alara. The usual merchants do. Josiah didn't haggle. He laid the coins on the counter. The gold felt warm in his palm, strangely alive. He thought of Alara's face, the shadow of sacrifice in her eyes. He had no clear plan yet, only a conviction. That ring belonged with her. And the school deserved to survive. He slipped the ring into his pocket, the weight of it a newfound responsibility. As he stepped out into the fading daylight, he saw Mr. Blackwood dismounting in front of the saloon, his tailored coat and confident stride a stark contrast to Alara's threadbare shawl. Blackwood caught sight of Josiah and gave him a cursory, dismissive nod, the kind a man of substance gives to one he deems insignificant. "Afternoon, Rivers," Blackwood said, his tone condescending. "Town seems to be full of folks with too much time and too little profit these days." His gaze flickered towards the schoolhouse, a small, weathered building at the end of a dirt track, visible from where they stood. A sneer touched his lips. "Still trying to keep that little charity case afloat, are they? Some things are best left to wither on the vine." Josiah met his gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Some things are worth fighting for, Mr. Blackwood." He didn't elaborate, simply touched the brim of his hat and walked away, leaving Blackwood to stare after him with a flicker of annoyance. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Josiah walked towards his own quiet corner of the world, the small gold band a heavy secret in his pocket. He knew Alara's sacrifice had been for the school. Returning the ring directly, immediately, might embarrass her, might make her feel like a charity case herself, the very thing Blackwood had so callously implied. He needed to find another way, a way to honor her spirit, support her cause, and perhaps, eventually, return what was so clearly precious to her. The harsh reality of Havenwood, the sparse cabin Alara called home, the difficult land that grudgingly yielded a living, all these things pressed in. But within that harshness, a small seed of connection had been planted, unnoticed by Alara. yet tended with quiet determination by the man who now held her ring. He was accustomed to solitude, to the quiet rhythm of his own labor, but Alara's plight, and her quiet courage, had stirred something in him, a protective instinct, a nascent empathy that was as surprising to him as it was compelling. The evenings in his own small cabin were usually filled with the mending of tack or the planning of the next day's work. Tonight, however, his thoughts would be consumed by a gold ring and the woman who had given it up. Alara delivered the coins from the sale of her ring to Miss Evans later that afternoon. The schoolhouse, a single room smelling of chalk dust and old paper, was cold despite the small stove in the corner. Miss Evans, a woman whose youth was already etched with the weariness of her thankless task, accepted the money with a gratitude that was painful to witness. "Oh, Alara, you shouldn't have," Miss Evans said, her voice thin. This is your wedding ring money, isn't it?" She knew. Everyone in Havenwood knew everyone else's burdens. "It's for the children, Abigail," Alara said, managing a small, tired smile. "For my child too, one day. John would have wanted it." The teacher's eyes welled. "This will keep us going for a little while. Perhaps buy some firewood, some new primers. But Mr. Blackwood, he's determined to see the school closed by spring." "We can't let him," Alara said, a spark of defiance lighting her fatigue. "This school is Havenwood's heart." Miss Evans nodded, but the hope in her eyes was fragile. "Your sacrifice. It's a profound one, Alara. I pray it's not in vain." Josiah, having completed his transaction with Mr. Thompson, did not head directly back to his ranch. Instead, he took a less traveled path that skirted the edge of town, a path that led him past the small, weathered schoolhouse. He lingered in the lengthening shadows of the cottonwoods, watching as Alara emerged, her shoulders a little less slumped than when she had entered the mercantile, but her face still etched with a deep weariness. He saw her pause and look back at the school, a place of such desperate hope, and he felt a tightening in his chest. The ring in his pocket seemed to grow heavier. His initial impulse had been simple: buy the ring, return it. But Mr. Blackwood's sneering comment, Miss Evans's known struggles, and Alara's own quiet determination had broadened his perspective. Returning the ring was paramount, but perhaps he could do more. Perhaps he could ensure her sacrifice wasn't just a temporary reprieve for the school, but a catalyst for something more lasting. His mind, accustomed to the practicalities of ranching and solitary labor, began to turn over possibilities. He had some savings carefully husbanded. He had skills with wood and tools. He was, for the moment, largely unknown in Havenwood, his actions unscrutinized. This anonymity could be an asset. He thought of Alara's child, the one she carried so protectively. That child, and all the children of Havenwood, deserved what the school offered. His own childhood had been hard, education a luxury often sacrificed to the demands of survival. He knew, firsthand, the limitations imposed by ignorance, the doors that remained closed. His decision solidified as dusk began to purple the sky. He would not approach Alara directly with the ring, not yet. That felt too abrupt, too much like charity, and her pride, he sensed, was a delicate and essential thing. Instead, he would find other ways to help, to support the school, to ease her burdens, all while seeking the right moment, the right way, to restore what she had lost. He would become an unseen hand, a quiet force working against the indifference and neglect that threatened to extinguish Havenwood's small flame of hope. The first test of his resolve came with the town council meeting scheduled for the following week. Mr. Blackwood was expected to formally propose the school's closure, citing lack of funds and dwindling community support. Josiah knew he couldn't speak out directly. He was still an outsider, his voice carrying little weight against a man like Blackwood. But he could, perhaps, shift the narrative subtly. He returned to his modest cabin, the ring now tucked safely away in an old wooden box that had once held his father's few keepsakes. The cabin was sparse, but clean, the result of his own steady labor. He lit a lantern, the yellow light pushing back the encroaching darkness, and sat at the rough-hewn table. He wasn't a man of many words, but he could write a clear hand. He took out a sheet of paper and a pen. An anonymous donation, he thought, presented at the right moment, might just give Miss Evans and the school's few supporters the leverage they needed. It wouldn't be a fortune, but it would be enough to challenge Blackwood's assertion of lack of funds, and it would be explicitly tied to the recent, inspiring act of generosity by a town citizen, Alarazakt. He penned a short note, carefully choosing his words, then sealed it in an envelope with a sum of money larger than what Alara had received for her ring. He would find a way to get it to Miss Evans before the council meeting, perhaps leaving it with one of the older, more trusted children who attended the school. Alara, meanwhile, faced her own small conflicts. The day after selling her ring, she encountered Mrs. Gable, one of the town's more notorious gossips, outside the mercantile. "Heard you sold your ring, Alara dear," Mrs. Gable said, her voice dripping with insincere sympathy. "Such a shame, but I suppose desperate times. And for the school. Such a noble gesture, though between you and me, I don't see how a few coins will stop Jedediah Blackwood, once he sets his mind to something." Alara squared her shoulders. "Every little bit helps, Mrs. Gable. And some things are more important than gold." Mrs. Gable sniffed. "Well, we'll see, won't we? We'll see if your sacrifice amounts to anything more than a pretty story." The words stung, planting seeds of doubt that Alara fought hard to suppress. Had she been foolish? Had she given up her most precious possession for nothing? The weight of her solitude pressed down on her. John would have known what to say, how to fight. She missed his strength, his unwavering optimism. Now she had only her own faltering courage to rely on. But as she walked away from Mrs. Gable's probing eyes, she touched the place on her finger where the ring had been, and a new, steely resolve began to form. She would not let it be for nothing. She would find ways, small ways, to support Miss Evans, to rally what little community spirit remained. For John, for their child. The days leading up to the council meeting were filled with a quiet tension in Havenwood. Alara found herself observing the townsfolk with a new intensity, trying to gauge who might stand with the school and who would defer to Blackwood's influence. She offered to help Miss Evans clean the schoolhouse, mend torn books, and listen to the children practice their recitations. In these small acts, she found a measure of purpose, a way to channel her grief and anxiety into something constructive. Josiah, true to his plan, sought out young Timmy Parker, a bright-eyed boy of 10 whose family lived on a small farm near the school. Timmy was known for his reliability. Josiah found him fishing by the creek. "Timmy," Josiah said, his voice gentle, "I have something important for Miss Evans. It's a donation for the school. Can I trust you to give this to her privately, before the council meeting? And to say it came from a friend of Havenwood." Timmy's eyes widened at the thickness of the envelope Josiah handed him. "Yes, sir, Mr. Rivers. I'll give it to her right away. And I won't say it was you." Josiah nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Good lad." He watched Timmy scamper off towards the schoolhouse, the envelope clutched tightly in his hand. It was a small step, but it felt right. He was working in the shadows, yes, but for a cause that was undeniably good. His gaze drifted towards Alara's small house, visible across the barren fields. He wondered if she felt any of this, any of the subtle currents he was trying to set in motion. He hoped, for her sake, that a little bit of light was about to break through her clouds of worry. He was beginning to understand that his desire to help her was becoming intertwined with a deeper, more personal interest. Her resilience in the face of such profound loss was captivating. Her selfless act at the mercantile had been more than just admirable. It had been a glimpse into a spirit of uncommon strength and compassion. And Josiah, a man long accustomed to solitude, found himself drawn to that spirit, like a traveler to a distant, warming fire. The week crawled by for Alara, each day a mixture of hope and trepidation. She spent more time at the schoolhouse, helping Miss Evans prepare for what felt like an impending battle. The children, sensing the tension, were subdued, their usual boisterous energy replaced by a watchful quiet. Alara read to them, her voice soft but steady, stories of courage and perseverance, tales that perhaps bolstered her own spirits as much as theirs. She noticed small improvements. A stack of freshly cut firewood mysteriously appearing by the schoolhouse door one morning, a basket of late-season apples left on Miss Evans's desk another. Miss Evans, flustered and grateful, attributed it to anonymous townsfolk, inspired perhaps by Alara's own contribution. Alara wondered, a faint stirring of curiosity in her heart. Havenwood was a small town, but acts of such quiet generosity were rare, especially now, with winter approaching and resources scarce. Josiah, meanwhile, kept his distance, though his thoughts were rarely far from Alara or the school. He worked his land with a renewed vigor, the physical labor a welcome outlet for his restless energy. He'd seen the wood he'd left, neatly stacked. He'd made sure the apples were from the hardiest tree in his neglected orchard, the last of the season's yield. These were small gestures easily overlooked, but they were his way of being present, of offering support without intrusion. He learned more about Alara through the casual talk at the mercantile when he went for supplies. He heard of her patience with the children, her quiet determination to assist Miss Evans. Each snippet of information deepened his admiration. He also heard the undercurrent of Blackwood's persistent campaign against the school, his assertions that it was an unnecessary burden on the taxpayers, his hints that the land the school sat on could be put to more productive use. The day of the council meeting arrived, cloaked in a gray, overcast sky that mirrored the town's mood. The meeting was to be held in the town hall, a slightly larger, more imposing version of the schoolhouse. Alara, her heart pounding, decided she had to be there. She had to bear witness, to lend her silent support to Miss Evans. She smoothed down her worn dress, took a deep breath, and walked towards the hall, aware of the curious glances of some, the sympathetic nods of others. Josiah also planned to attend, though he would stand at the back, an observer as always. He wanted to see the effect of his anonymous donation, to gauge the town's reaction. He arrived early, taking up a position near the door, his hat pulled low. He saw Alara enter, her face pale but resolute. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a spark of unexpected recognition, before she quickly looked away, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. He wondered what she thought of him, this quiet man who seemed to appear at the peripheries of her life. The meeting began, presided over by Mayor Thompson, who also ran the mercantile. After some routine town business, Jedediah Blackwood rose to speak. He was a portly man, his voice booming with self-importance. "Mr. Mayor, members of the council, esteemed citizens of Havenwood," he began, his gaze sweeping the room. "We are here today to discuss a matter of fiscal responsibility. I speak, of course, of the schoolhouse." He launched into a prepared speech, detailing the costs, the supposed lack of attendance, the impracticality of maintaining a full-time teacher for so few pupils. "It is with a heavy heart," he concluded, his tone anything but mournful, "that I propose we close the school at the end of this term and repurpose the building for something that will truly benefit the entire community, perhaps a larger grain storage facility." A murmur ran through the room. Miss Evans, seated near the front, looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumped. Alara felt a surge of anger, then a wave of despair. It seemed Mrs. Gable had been right. Her sacrifice was to be for nothing. Then, Mayor Thompson cleared his throat. "Before we discuss Mr. Blackwood's proposal further, Miss Evans has asked to say a few words. And she has an announcement." Miss Evans stood, her hands trembling, but her voice, when she spoke, was surprisingly firm. "Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I understand Mr. Blackwood's concerns about funding. It is true that the school has struggled. However, she paused, then held up a thick envelope, the one Timmy Parker had delivered. Thanks to the extraordinary generosity of some of Havenwood's citizens, our situation has changed. Firstly, Mrs. Alara Wallace made a significant personal sacrifice to contribute to the school fund. She looked towards Alara, a grateful smile on her face. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck at the public acknowledgement. And just this morning, Miss Evans continued, her voice gaining strength, an anonymous benefactor, inspired by Mrs. Wallace's commitment, has made a further, very substantial donation. She opened the envelope and laid a sheaf of banknotes on the table. This sum is enough to cover our operating costs for the remainder of the year, purchase needed supplies, and even begin some essential repairs to the building. A stunned silence filled the room, broken only by Blackwood's sputtering. Bvedli. Who anonymous? This is highly irregular. Mayor Thompson peered at the banknotes. Well, Jedediah, the money seems real enough. And the note attached simply states it is from a friend of Havenwood, who believes in its future. A new energy filled the room. Several townsfolk, who had previously been silent, began to murmur their support for keeping the school open. The tide, it seemed, had begun to turn. Blackwood, for once, looked flustig. Josiah, watching from the back, allowed himself a small internal sigh of relief. It had worked. Alara's sacrifice had not been in vain. It had been magnified. He saw Alara's face, the astonishment, the dawning hope. Her gaze swept the room, as if searching for this unknown benefactor. For a moment, her eyes rested on him again. Longer this time, a question in their depths. He held her gaze for a heartbeat, then subtly shook his head, a silent denial. It was not yet time for her to know. The council, swayed by the unexpected influx of funds and the shift in public opinion, voted to table Blackwood's proposal indefinitely. The school was safe, at least for now. As the meeting adjourned, a relieved buzz filled the hall. Alara felt lightheaded, a dizzying mix of gratitude and disbelief. She wanted to thank this anonymous donor, this friend of Havenwood. Who could it be? Outside, as people dispersed, Josiah saw Alara standing alone for a moment, looking up at the gray sky, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, he thought, but of profound relief. He felt an almost irresistible urge to go to her, to speak to her, but he held back. His role was still in the shadows, but the connection he felt, the invisible thread that seemed to link his fate with hers, grew stronger. He knew this was only the first step. The money would help, but the school needed more than just funds. It needed sustained community support, and Alara, he sensed, needed more than just the safety of the school for her child. She needed her own sense of security, of hope. And he still had her wedding ring, a silent promise waiting to be fulfilled. The immediate crisis of the school's closure had been averted, thanks in large part to Josiah's anonymous intervention, which had amplified Alara's initial sacrifice. A fragile sense of optimism settled over Havenwood, or at least over those who valued the small, clapboard schoolhouse. Miss Evans bustled with renewed energy, purchasing new slates, mending books with vigor, and even planning a small Thanksgiving pageant for the children. Alara found herself drawn more frequently to the school, her quiet assistance a balm to her own restless spirit. She helped the younger children with their letters, her hand gently guiding theirs, and listened as the older ones recited poetry, their earnest voices filling the small room. She felt a part of something larger than her own grief, a fragile community banding together. Yet, the mystery of the anonymous donor lingered in her mind. She would often catch herself scanning the faces in the mercantile or on the street, wondering who this friend of Havenwood might be. Her gaze would occasionally fall on Josiah Rivers, the quiet man who worked the old Miller place. He was an enigma. He rarely spoke, yet his eyes seemed to observe everything with a quiet intensity. She'd seen him at the council meeting, standing at the back, his expression unreadable. There was a stillness about him, a self-containment that was both intriguing and slightly intimidating. She dismissed the fleeting thought that he could be the one. He seemed like a man struggling to make his own way, not someone with funds to spare for anonymous donations. Josiah, for his part, continued his careful dance of assistance from a distance. He focused on the school's practical needs. One cold morning, Miss Evans arrived to find the schoolhouse's rickety porch steps expertly repaired, the wood new and sturdy. Another day, a supply of warm, woolen blankets appeared, perfect for warding off the winter chill that seeped through the building's thin walls. These acts were always unattributed, discovered as if by magic. Whispers started among the townsfolk. Some said it was angels. Others suspected a repentant sinner trying to earn their way to heaven. Miss Evans simply offered heartfelt thanks to the unknown benefactor during Sunday service, her words warming Ilara's heart. Ilara's pregnancy was advancing, the gentle swell of her belly now more pronounced. With it came a deeper sense of vulnerability, but also a fierce, protective love for the child she had yet to meet. The approaching winter loomed large in her thoughts. Her small cabin was drafty, her supply of firewood dwindling. She spent her evenings mending John's old coats, trying to fashion them into something warm for herself, the familiar scent of him both a comfort and a fresh stab of pain. She missed her ring terribly. It wasn't just the gold. It was the circle, the unbroken promise. Its absence was a constant, dull ache on her finger. Josiah was acutely aware of Ilara's solitude and her impending challenges. He made it a point to pass by her cabin on his way to or from town, always taking the longer, less traveled route. He didn't intrude, didn't even slow his pace noticeably, but his keen eyes took in the signs. The thinning woodpile, the way she hunched her shoulders against the wind, the faint blue shadows of fatigue under her eyes. His desire to help her directly, to ease her burdens in a more personal way, grew stronger each day. But the ring remained his secret, a delicate matter he hadn't yet figured out how to broach. He feared that revealing his purchase of it, and his subsequent anonymous gifts, might overwhelm her or worse, make her feel indebted or pitted. Her dignity was paramount. One afternoon, as a biting wind swept down from the northern peaks, signaling the first true taste of winter, Josiah noticed that the chimney on Ilara's cabin was emitting only a thin wisp of smoke. He knew she gathered her own firewood from the sparse woods nearby, a difficult task for anyone, let alone a pregnant woman. That evening, under the cloak of a moonless night, he loaded his wagon with seasoned hardwood from his own plentiful supply, logs he had cut and split himself. He drove the wagon silently to the edge of Ilara's property, unloaded the wood, and stacked it neatly near her back door, where she would be sure to find it. He was gone before the first hint of dawn, leaving no trace but the life-saving gift. When Ilara opened her door the next morning to the raw chill, the sight of the neatly stacked firewood brought tears to her eyes. It was a small miracle. She looked around, searching for any sign of her benefactor, but the frost-covered ground was undisturbed. Who was doing this? Who cared enough to perform these acts of kindness, unseen and unthanked? A warmth spread through her, a feeling of being watched over, protected. It was a strange, unsettling, yet deeply comforting sensation. The Thanksgiving pageant at the school was a modest affair, but filled with a genuine warmth that belied the poverty of many of the families present. The children, scrubbed and shining, recited their lines with a charming earnestness, their voices a testament to Miss Evans's patient teaching. Ilara sat near the back, her hands folded over her belly, a soft smile on her face. She felt John's absence keenly at moments like this, moments of community and shared joy. Josiah attended, too, standing in his usual spot by the door. He watched Ilara, saw the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes shone as she watched the children. His heart ached with a protective tenderness that was entirely new to him. He saw Jedediah Blackwood there as well, his presence a grudging concession to public opinion, his expression bored and faintly contemptuous. Blackwood's gaze lingered on Alara for a moment, a flicker of something calculating in his eyes that Josiah didn't like. Blackwood had been thwarted at the council meeting, but Josiah sensed the man hadn't given up on his ambitions for the school land, or perhaps, for controlling the town's narrative. After the pageant, as families mingled and shared cider and cookies, Miss Evans approached Alara. "That woodpile, Alara," she said in a low voice. "And the blankets, I've been asking around. No one claims to know who's responsible. But I have my suspicions." Her eyes flickered towards Josiah, who was quietly observing the scene. "Mr. Rivers, he's a quiet man, but he seems capable. And he was at the council meeting. He looked invested." Alara followed Miss Evans's gaze. Josiah Rivers. Could it be him? He was strong, certainly, and he did seem to appear at odd, significant moments. But why would he do such things? And why so secretly? The thought was unsettling. If it was him, he had witnessed her at her most vulnerable, selling her ring. The idea made her blush. The small successes, the school remaining open, the anonymous gifts were heartening, but Alara knew the reprieve was fragile. Winter was setting in with a vengeance. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Her meager savings dwindled. The firewood, though a blessing, wouldn't last forever. She began to worry about the coming months, about how she would manage with a newborn when the snows lay deep. Josiah, too, felt the pressure of the advancing season. He knew Alara needed more than just anonymous aid. He needed to find a way to approach her, to offer help more directly, and above all, to return her ring. The right moment, however, remained elusive. He saw her in town occasionally, her face growing paler, her steps slower as her pregnancy advanced. Each sighting was a fresh pang of concern. One afternoon he found his opportunity, or rather, it found him. He was at the mercantile, purchasing supplies, when Alara entered. She looked tired, her shawl pulled tight around her. She was buying a small bag of flour and some beans, her purchases meager. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind blew the door open with a crash, and a stray dog, a scrawny, half-starved creature that often haunted the edges of town, darted inside, yelping in fear. It ran blindly, colliding with Alara and knocking her off balance. She cried out, stumbling, her hand going to her belly. Before anyone else could react, Josiah was there. He moved with a speed and grace that belied his usual quiet demeanor, catching Alara's arm, steadying her. "Easy there, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. His hand was strong and warm on her arm. "Are you all right?" Alara looked up at him, her eyes wide with fright, then relief. Yes, I think so. Thank you, Mr. Rivers." She was trembling. Mr. Thompson shooed the dog out, muttering about strays. Josiah kept a steadying hand on Alara's arm until her trembling subsided. "You should sit for a moment," he said, his gaze full of a concern that was far from anonymous. He guided her to a nearby crate. "Thank you," she said again, her voice a little breathless. "That was a shock. Dogs and sudden noises," he said with a faint smile. "A bad combination." Their eyes met, and for the first time, there was a direct, open acknowledgement between them, a sense of shared experience, however brief. He saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the weariness, but also that flicker of resilience he so admired. She saw in his gaze not pity, but a genuine, quiet strength, and a kindness that seemed to go deeper than mere politeness. "Let me help you with your parcels," he offered, gesturing to the small bag of flour. "Oh, no, I can manage," she began, but he was already picking it up. "It's no trouble." He walked with her to her door, a comfortable silence settling between them. The wind whipped around them, but for Alara, The chill seemed a little less biting. At her door, she turned to him. "Thank you again, Mr. Rivers." For everything, her everything was freighted with unspoken meaning, a hint that perhaps Miss Evans's suspicions had taken root. Josiah simply nodded. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Wallace." He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say more, then touched the brim of his hat and turned away. Alara watched him walk down the path, his broad shoulders set against the wind. A strange warmth spread through her. Perhaps her anonymous benefactor wasn't an angel, but a quiet cowboy with kind eyes and strong hands. The thought, instead of making her feel embarrassed, brought a tentative, unfamiliar sense of hope. The world felt a little less hostile, a little less lonely. The ring was still gone, a void on her hand, but something else, something unexpected, seemed to be taking its place, a fragile tendril of human connection in the vast wilderness of her grief. The encounter at the mercantile marked a subtle shift. Josiah felt it, Alara felt it. The wall of anonymity, while not entirely dismantled, had become more porous. He found himself looking for excuses, however small, to cross her path, always careful to maintain a respectful distance, yet offering a quiet word, a small courtesy. He'd happen to be leaving the mercantile as she arrived and hold the door, or he'd be mending a fence near the road she took to the schoolhouse and offer a polite good day. Mrs. Wallace, each brief exchange was a delicate step on untrodden ground. Alara, in turn, found herself less inclined to look away, more willing to meet his steady gaze. She saw the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, the gentle concern that seemed at odds with his rugged exterior. Miss Evans's suggestion that he might be their benefactor no longer seemed so far-fetched. If it was him, his quiet, consistent kindness was slowly chipping away at her reserve, at the fortress she had built around her heart since John's death. The deepening winter brought new anxieties. A heavy snowfall blanketed Havenwood, isolating many of the outlying homesteads. Alara, her firewood supply bolstered by Josiah's anonymous gift, was managing, but the thought of being snowed in alone when her time came was a constant worry. The school closed temporarily due to the weather, the children confined to their homes. Miss Evans, who boarded with the Parker family, fretted about her students and the schoolhouse itself, fearing the weight of the snow on the old roof. Josiah, isolated on his own ranch, found his thoughts consumed by Alara. He knew her time was drawing near. He pictured her alone in that small cabin, facing the daunting prospect of childbirth without support. The thought was unbearable. His carefully constructed plans for returning the ring, for gradually revealing his role, seemed insignificant in the face of her immediate pressing needs. One evening, as another blizzard raged outside, he made a decision. Anonymity had served its purpose. Now what Alara needed was a visible, reliable presence. He still didn't know how to give her back the ring without causing her discomfort, but he knew he couldn't leave her to face the worst of winter and the birth of her child, alone. The next morning, after the storm had subsided enough for travel, Josiah hitched his strongest horse to his sturdy sled and made his way towards Alara's cabin. The drifts were deep, the air crystalline and biting. He carried a fresh supply of wood, a side of smoked bacon, and a sack of potatoes, practical offerings. But more than that, he carried an offer of help, direct and unambiguous. He found Alara struggling to clear a path from her door, her face pale, her movements labored. She looked up, startled as he approached. "Mr. Rivers," she said, her breath clouding in the frigid air. "What are you doing out in this?" "Came to check on you, Mrs. Wallace," he said, his voice gentle. "And to bring a few things." He began unloading the sled. Tears welled in Alara's eyes. You don't have to do this." "I want to," he said simply. He stacked the wood by her door, then carried the provisions inside her small, cold cabin. The fire in her stove was low. He set about building it up, his movements efficient and sure. Alara watched him, a mixture of gratitude and confusion on her face. The wood before, the blankets at the school, the repairs. Was that you, Mr. Rivers? Josiah paused, then met her gaze directly. Yes, ma'am. That was me. She sank onto a small stool, her hand on her belly. But why? I don't understand. He hesitated, searching for the right words. I saw you at the mercantile that day, when you sold your ring. For the school. It was a brave thing to do, a selfless thing. I couldn't just stand by. He didn't mention buying the ring itself. That was a conversation for another time, a more private moment. Alara was silent for a long moment, absorbing his words. You've been Havenwood's angel all along, she whispered, a tear escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. No angel, ma'am, he said, a faint, self-deprecating smile touching his lips. Just a man who believes in folks helping each other out, especially folks like you, who give so much themselves. He spent the rest of the morning ensuring her cabin was warm and secure, checking for drafts, making sure she had enough kindling. He worked with a quiet competence that Alara found immensely reassuring. Before he left, he said, I live just over Redemption Creek, Mrs. Wallace. If you need anything at all, you send word. Or if you can't, I'll be checking in regularly. You're not alone in this. His words, his presence were a lifeline. The fear that had been her constant companion began to recede, replaced by a tentative sense of security. Josiah Rivers, the quiet cowboy, the secret benefactor, was no longer a mystery, but a tangible source of strength and kindness. His visits became regular over the next few weeks. He'd bring firewood, share a cup of coffee, or simply sit with her for a while, his quiet presence a comfort. They talked not about deeply personal things initially, but about the weather, the town, the progress on his ranch. Alara learned about his plans to restore the old Miller place, his knowledge of cattle and crops. He, in turn, learned about her life with John, her dreams for her child, her love for books and learning. A quiet friendship blossomed, nurtured by shared solitude and mutual respect. The ring, however, remained a silent presence in Josiah's thoughts, a piece of unfinished business. He carried it with him always, tucked into a small leather pouch. He was waiting for the right moment, a moment when giving it back wouldn't feel like a transaction, but an offering from the heart. Jedediah Blackwood, meanwhile, had not been idle. Thwarted in his initial attempt to close the school, he began a more insidious campaign. Rumors started circulating in town, whispers about the questionable source of the school's newfound funding, insinuations about Miss Evans's competence, and even veiled comments about Alara, the grieving widow who seemed to be receiving undue attention from the newcomer, Rivers. Blackwood's aim was to undermine the school's support, to create an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust. One afternoon, when Josiah was in town for supplies, he overheard Blackwood talking to a group of men in front of the saloon. And this Rivers fellow, Blackwood was saying, his voice loud enough to carry, appears out of nowhere, starts throwing money around. Where does a man like that get his funds, I ask you? And his sudden interest in the widow Wallace. Well, a man has to wonder about his motives. Josiah felt a cold anger rise within him. He was a patient man, but Blackwood was treading on dangerous ground, slandering Alara's name. He stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, Josiah said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable edge. If you have something to say about me or Mrs. Wallace, perhaps you should say it to my face. Blackwood, surprised by Josiah's direct challenge, stammered for a moment, then puffed out his chest. I merely voice the concerns of the community, Rivers. A lone woman, a mysterious benefactor. It raises questions. The only question here, Blackwood, Josiah said, his eyes like ice, is why you're so determined to harm a good woman and destroy a school that means so much to this town. My funds are my own business, honestly earned. And my respect for Mrs. Wallace is just that, respect. Something you clearly know little about. The men listening shifted uncomfortably. Josiah's quiet intensity was more formidable than Blackwood's bluster. Blackwood, unwilling to back down completely but clearly unnerved, scoffed. "We'll see who the town believes, Rivers. We'll see." He turned and stalked into the saloon. Josiah knew this was a turning point. Blackwood had made the conflict personal. It was no longer just about anonymous aid. It was about protecting Alara's reputation and ensuring the school's future against a determined adversary. His feelings for Alara had deepened from admiration and compassion into something far more profound, something that felt like love. The thought of her being hurt by Blackwood's malice was intolerable. He realized that returning her ring was now more critical than ever. It wasn't just about restoring a piece of her past. It was about offering her a symbol of his commitment, his protection, his hope for their future. The pressure mounted as Alara's time drew undeniably close. The first early labor pains began one fierce, windswept night, the kind where the wind howled like a hungry wolf outside her small cabin. Fear, sharp and cold, gripped her. She was alone. John was gone. The midwife, Mrs. Peterson, lived across town. A journey impossible in the blizzard that had just begun to rage. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then, through the shrieking wind, she heard a sound, a steady, rhythmic chopping. It was Josiah. He had anticipated this, had seen the signs of the worsening storm and her impending labor, and had made his way to her cabin before the blizzard hit its full fury, determined not to let her face this alone. He had been quietly staying in her small, cold barn, checking on her periodically, ready. He came in, his face ruddy from the cold, snowflakes clinging to his hat. "Mrs. Wallace, Alara," he said, his voice gentle but firm, seeing the fear in her eyes. "I'm here. You're not alone." Relief, so potent it was dizzying, washed over her. He helped her to her bed, stoked the fire until the cabin was warm, and then, with a quiet competence that belied any inexperience, he prepared to assist her. He had helped birth calves and foals on countless occasions. He told himself this was not so different, though his heart hammered in his chest with an emotion far removed from animal husbandry. This was Alara. This was her child. The night was long and arduous. Alara, caught in the throes of labor, clung to Josiah's steady presence as much as his hand. He spoke to her in low, soothing tones, wiped her brow, offered her sips of water. He was a rock in the storm of her pain, his quiet strength her anchor. And as dawn painted the frosted window panes with pale light, a new cry filled the small cabin, the cry of a healthy baby boy. Alara, exhausted but radiant, held her son, John's son, in her arms. Tears of joy and relief streamed down her face. Josiah stood by, his own eyes suspiciously bright, a profound sense of awe filling him. He had witnessed a miracle, had been a part of it. "He's beautiful, Alara," he whispered. "He looks like you." She smiled up at him, her heart overflowing. "Thank you, Josiah, for everything. You saved us." Later that day, when Alara was resting and the baby slept peacefully beside her, Josiah knew the moment had come. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside hushed and white. The cabin was warm, filled with the sense of peace and new beginnings. He sat by her bedside, took the small leather pouch from his pocket, and gently extracted the gold ring. "Alara," he began, his voice a little husky, "there's something I need to give you, something that belongs to you." He held out the ring. Her eyes widened, then filled with tears again, this time of stunned disbelief. My ring? But how?" "I bought it back that day, after you left the mercantile," he confessed, his gaze earnest. "I couldn't bear to see it lost to you. I always intended to return it. I was just waiting for the right time." She stared at the ring, then at him, her expression a mixture of astonishment and dawning understanding. All this time you had it. Yes, he said. It felt like a promise. A promise that good things could still happen. He took her hand, the one that had felt bare for so long, and gently, reverently, slipped the ring back onto her finger. Fit perfectly. Josiah, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She touched the ring, then reached out and laid her other hand over his. This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me. You deserve to have it back, Alara, he said, his voice thick with feeling. It represents love and sacrifice. And now, perhaps. He looked from the ring to her eyes, then to the sleeping child. It can represent new beginnings too. Their eyes met, and in that gaze all pretenses fell away. What lay between them was no longer just friendship or gratitude, but a deep, unspoken love, forged in shared hardship, quiet acts of kindness, and the miraculous arrival of new life. He had not just bought back a piece of gold. He had helped her reclaim a piece of her heart, and in doing so had found his own. The news of the baby's birth, and Josiah's role in it, spread through Havenwood as soon as the paths were cleared. Mrs. Peterson, the midwife, arrived flustered but full of admiration for Josiah's calm handling of the situation. Some, like Jedediah Blackwood, scoffed, their whispers turning more pointed, insinuating impropriety. Blackwood saw his influence in the town waning, the respect for Josiah and Alara growing, and it fueled his resentment. He knew the school was still vulnerable. The anonymous donation was substantial but not inexhaustible, and winter repairs would be costly. He decided it was time for a more direct confrontation, a public showdown to discredit Rivers and reassert his own authority. He called for a special town meeting, ostensibly to discuss urgent community matters. But everyone knew his target was the school, and by extension, Josiah and Alara. The atmosphere in Havenwood grew tense. People took sides, some swayed by Blackwood's persistent negativity, others fiercely loyal to Miss Evans, Alara, and the quiet man who had proven himself a true friend. The meeting was scheduled to be held in the town hall, the same place where Alara's sacrifice had first been acknowledged, where Josiah's anonymous gift had turned the tide. This time, however, the stakes felt even higher. It wasn't just about funding. It was about the heart and soul of their community, about decency and compassion versus greed and cynicism. Alara, though still recovering, was determined to be there. With her son, little John, cradled in her arms, and Josiah by her side, she walked into the crowded hall. Her head was held high, the gold band gleaming on her finger, a visible symbol of love restored and hope rekindled. Miss Evans was there, looking anxious but resolute. Many of the school children and their parents had also come, a silent show of support. Blackwood began, his voice dripping with false concern. He spoke of the unsuitability of the current school arrangements, the uncertainty of its funding, and then he turned his attack directly on Josiah. This Mr. Rivers, Blackwood sneered, who appeared from nowhere, who seems to have an inexhaustible supply of anonymous cash, who has insinuated himself into the life of a vulnerable widow. What do we really know about him? What are his true intentions for our town, for our school, for Mrs. Wallace? A hush fell over the room. Alara felt Josiah tense beside her, but before he could speak, she stepped forward, her voice clear and strong, resonating with a newfound confidence. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her gaze unwavering, you speak of uncertainty and questionable intentions. Let me tell you what is certain. What is certain is that Mr. Rivers is a good and honorable man. He helped save my son's life. He has shown nothing but kindness and respect not only to me, but to this entire community through his quiet support of our school. She held up her hand, the ring glinting. You question his motives? He returned this to me, my wedding ring, which I sold in desperation to help the school. He bought it back that very day, asking nothing in return, simply because he understood its value, a value beyond money. Does that sound like a man of ill intent? Her words, spoken with such heartfelt conviction, stunned the crowd into silence. Then Miss Evans stood. And I can attest to Mr. Rivers's character. The anonymous donations, the repairs, the firewood, it was all him. He sought no credit, only the well-being of our children. Josiah finally spoke, his voice calm but firm, addressing not just Blackwood but the entire assembly. My intentions are simple, Mr. Blackwood. I believe in Havenwood. I believe in its children. And I believe in Mrs. Wallace. He looked at Alara, his expression full of a love and admiration that was plain for all to see. The school needs more than just temporary fixes. It needs a commitment. I own the old Miller place. It has timber. I have skills. I propose we work together, as a community, to properly repair and maintain our school, to ensure its future. I will contribute my labor and what resources I can. This isn't about charity. It's about investment in who we are and who we want to be. His words, combined with Alara's passionate defense, turned the tide completely. One by one, other townsfolk stood up, voicing their support, offering to help with labor, materials, whatever they could spare. The momentum shifted decisively against Blackwood. His face turned florid, his bluster deflating as he realized he had lost. He was met not with agreement, but with the quiet, determined resolve of a community united. Shamed and outmaneuvered, he sank back into his chair, his power effectively broken by the simple truths of compassion and integrity. The threat to the school was neutralized, not by a single act, but by a series of them, culminating in this public affirmation of shared values. Alara and Josiah, standing together, had shown Havenwood that its strength lay not in its wealthiest citizen, but in the courage and kindness of its ordinary people. In the quiet aftermath of the town meeting, a profound sense of relief and connection settled between Alara and Josiah. As the townsfolk dispersed, many stopping to offer words of encouragement or to shake Josiah's hand, he and Alara found themselves standing near the warmth of the hall stove, little John sleeping peacefully in her arms. The harsh lines of worry that had etched Alara's face for so long seemed to have softened, replaced by a gentle radiance. Josiah looked at her, his heart full. The journey had been fraught with uncertainty, with hidden actions and unspoken emotions, but they had arrived at a place of clarity. You were magnificent, Alara, he said softly, his gaze full of admiration. She blushed, a becoming warmth rising in her cheeks. I only spoke the truth, Josiah. You gave me the courage to do so. She touched the ring on her finger. This and everything else you've done. You showed me what true value means. It's not in gold, but in kindness, in standing up for what's right. Mayor Thompson approached them, a broad smile on his face. Well, Rivers, Mrs. Wallace, it seems you've managed to do what many thought impossible. Unite this town for a common good. Blackwood won't be troubling the school again anytime soon, I reckon. He clapped Josiah on the shoulder. We'll start organizing the work parties for the schoolhouse next week. Looks like Havenwood's got a future after all. A few townsfolk, those who had perhaps been swayed by Blackwood's earlier cynicism, now approached Alara and Josiah with offers of help, their attitudes transformed by the undeniable evidence of their integrity and the collective will of the community. The systemic chill of suspicion had begun to thaw, replaced by a burgeoning warmth of communal spirit. Alara, no longer just the pregnant widow or the subject of gossip, was now seen as a woman of strength and principle, a mother who had fought for her child's future and, in doing so, had helped secure the future for all Havenwood's children. Her agency, her voice had been fully realized. Later, as Josiah walked Alara and the baby back to her small cabin, the winter stars blazed with a fierce clarity in the cold night sky. The path was dusted with fresh snow, crunching softly underfoot. A comfortable silence settled between them, laden with unspoken emotions and the promise of what lay ahead. At her door, Alara turned to him. Thank you, Josiah, she said, her voice soft but sure. For everything. For the ring. For my son. For seeing me. He reached out, his gloved hand gently covering hers, the one with the ring. Alara, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. It was you who showed me the way. Your courage, your sacrifice for the school. That's what started all of this. He paused, his gaze searching hers. The ring. I hope now it means more than just a memory of what was lost. I hope it can also be a symbol of what can be found. She looked down at their joined hands, then up into his eyes, and a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. I think it already is, Josiah. The cabin, once a place of solitude and sorrow, now felt like a haven, warmed not just by the fire in the stove, but by the presence of new life and the promise of a shared future. The land around them was harsh, the winters long, but within these two hearts, and within the small, resilient community of Havenwood, something precious had taken root. He watched her turn and go inside, the lamplight spilling from her window a welcoming beacon in the vast, cold darkness. He hadn't just bought back a ring. He had helped to weave a new tapestry of hope and love, right here in the heart of the unforgiving West. And as he stood there for a moment, under the silent, watchful stars, he knew his solitary life was over. He had found his place, his purpose, and his heart, right here with Alara and her child, in the little town he now called home. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments.